Hey folks, I'm Gino the Painting Acolyte, and today I'm going to be talking about my most essential non-essentials. The hobby luxuries that I've splurged on that I never want to go without again. These are the kind of things that you absolutely 100% do not need to partake in this hobby, to enjoy it, to get miniatures painted, or enjoy yourself at all. But they are things that, now that I have, I never want to partake in this hobby without them again. They range in how often I use them and how much they might cost, but they either save me time, make the hobby just more enjoyable in general, or just allow me to paint more or better, or sometimes all of those things in one. So let's get into the top 5 essential, non-essential hobby luxuries. That's right, baby, we're doing the YouTube bait top 5 hobby list thing. I really hated myself for doing that. Now, before we begin, I want to say a quick word about something that is noticeably absent from this list. That is a wet palette. Mine's a little scuffed up because I've used it a lot and gotten paint on it, but this is my wet palette right here. And why a wet palette is absent from this hobby luxury essential non-essential list is because while you absolutely don't need one to paint miniatures at true beginning of the hobby, I think that it is as close to essential to the miniature hobby as anything can get. I genuinely consider one of these a mandatory purchase for anyone who's looking to stay into this miniature painting hobby for any length of time. A regular old palette is perfectly fine for your first few miniatures to kind of get a taste of the hobby and to see if you enjoy it. And you definitely want to keep some like regular old palettes for, your metallic paints or effects paints or things that you don't really want to get on your wet palette just for various reasons. But if you're engaging with this hobby in any sort of consistency, I really think that you actually need one of these. I think a wet palette is the first and most important investment you can make into the miniature painting hobby. And with that being said, it's not even a particularly expensive investment. Trust me, you do not need one of those huge, fancy, marketed towards miniature painters wet palettes that you can find online. You don't need anything fancy. Hell, you don't even need to actually buy one. You can make one of these yourself. There's plenty of guides on how to make these online, and if you really don't want to spend the money, you can make one yourself. But even buying one like this is not that expensive. A wet palette really just makes the miniature painting hobby so much easier and freer feeling. Having paint stay fresh for hours instead of minutes, the ease of being able to mix paints that you already have on your palette and mix them together to create fun and new colors, not having to clean and prep a whole new palette every single time you sit down to paint. The positives of a wet palette far outweigh even the slightest of potential costs that it can have to get one. So, while a wet palette is technically not mandatory, it is not on this list because I believe out of anything else that you can do in this hobby, a wet palette is the most mandatory thing that you can acquire. With that said, let's get into the top 5 list, starting from least expensive to most expensive of my essential, non-essential hobby luxuries. The first luxury that I don't want to live without anymore is a handy collection of various bottles. There's a lot of liquids that we use in this hobby, from just plain old water to paint thinner, acrylic paint thinner, mineral spirits, isopropyl alcohol, cleaning solutions of various kinds. There's a lot of different things that we use in this hobby that come in, liquid form. Now, some of these things come in handy-dandy bottles to begin with, but sometimes you get a really big bottle of something and it's not really handy to have on hand, or sometimes it just doesn't come in a bottle that's really useful for regular use anyway. And that's why I think that just having a small collection of handy squirt bottles on hand is really helpful to just make your life easier. Here's the collection that I have at the ready at all times. I buy some cheap plastic squirt bottles that you get in the kitchen section and label them with what's inside with some tape. As a side note, please be nice about my handwriting. It's been this bad since grade school and it's not gonna get any better. Trust me, I'm sorry. Here I have a bottle of isopropyl alcohol. I use this for regular airbrush cleaning as well as with a Q-tip or a junk brush if I ever need to remove just a section of paint on a model. With an airbrush, you go through a lot of ISO, so it's great to have some easy on hand. I have a bottle of airbrush thinner. I use this basically any time I put paint in my airbrush, and it's really handy to transfer the thinner from the bottle it comes in into a squirt bottle like this so that it's easy to put into my airbrush whenever I need it. Here's some airbrush cleaner. I use this like the ISO to clean my airbrush, obviously. When I clean my airbrush, I usually use water, isopropyl alcohol, and this cleaner in various quantities and mixtures to make sure it's spick and span. And speaking of water, here's an old airbrush cleaner bottle I keep on my brush painting desk. I cleaned out the bottle and filled it with water, and I keep it here in case I need to add water to any of my paint mixes, rehydrate my wet palette, or if I, forgot to refill my brush cleaning cups. This is a tattoo cleaning squirt bottle, I think, that is full of water that I keep at my airbrush stand. Having it in a handy bottle like this is really nice for cleaning out the airbrush cup, thinning out paint, or anything else that I might need water for. And the narrow nozzle on this gives a nice, decent, accurate, pressurized flow that makes removing stubborn paint easier. Finally, I keep a bottle of mineral or white spirits that I use with oil paints and washes. The bottles that these spirits usually come in aren't super useful by the ways that we miniature painters use them, so I transferred mine into this bottle. No more messing with pipettes or pouring and spilling spirits everywhere. And trust me, you do not want to spill spirits everywhere. They do not smell good, even the odorless ones. All these bottles are either reused from things that I already had and went through, or were picked up really cheaply at my local grocery store in the kitchen section for, I don't know, $1 each or something. You can probably find really cheap bottles on Amazon if you want, or anything like that. They're really cheap and handy, and I use them pretty much every single time I sit down to paint, especially when I sit down to airbrush. They're a super easy investment to make, and they make your miniature painting life so much easier. Number 2 on my list of luxuries is
industrial strength hairdryer. And I can't live without it!
It's a small, crappy, cheap hairdryer that I keep by my desk. This is a pretty recent purchase in comparison to everything else on this list that I got, and I don't use this hairdryer super often, but when I do use it, it's really nice to have on hand. I scouted Amazon for literally the cheapest and smallest hairdryer I could find, and made sure that it had a loop so that I could hang it from a hook or a nail or something on my desk. Now, it would probably be easier if you've got like a thrift store near you to like hunt for a hairdryer there, but there's nothing around me like that, so I just ordered literally the cheapest one I could find on Amazon that fit my needs. I use this hairdryer when I want paint to dry faster, simple as. When you're batch painting models, drying time doesn't matter too much, but when you're working on a single model or using certain techniques, you can be left, well, watching paint dry. I use this the most often when I'm painting lava bases for my gray nights. That technique uses a lot of glazing and washing, and being able to speed up those drying times is really nice to get a finished product faster. Just hit whatever spot you want to dry with a gentle pass on the lowest setting, and it speeds up drying immeasurably. A little hairdryer like this is a super lazy tool to have on hand, and I don't use it super often, but for a really small investment, it's really handy when I do need it, so I never want a hobby without one. Number 3 on my list is much more of a niche purchase that you might not need, but I have found to make my life so much easier, and that's this. An ultrasonic cleaner. Now, this one that I have right here is kind of crappy, and the plastic is starting to break on parts of it, and it's not the nicest or highest of quality of ultrasonic cleaners, but whenever I buy a new thing like this that could be pricey, or should be pricey if it's like a nice one, I try and find like the cheapo crappy model on Amazon. You know the things where like you scroll through Amazon and there's like 15 different listings of the same exact thing, just with some like fake brand name that you've never heard of before, and all of the descriptions are like very clearly horribly translated English? Yeah, this is one of those. I don't remember how much it cost, but it was much cheaper than one of the nicer, like more legit ultrasonic cleaners, because I wanted to try it out and see if I actually used it and liked it. And turns out, oh boy do I. I use this thing in a few different ways. The way that I use it the most is to really deep clean and scrub my airbrushes whenever they're really gunked up with paint or anything like that. I disassemble the airbrush, I clean the needle separately because that's not going to fit in here and I don't want to damage the needle. But I disassemble the airbrush, I put them all in a small Ziploc bag that fits all the parts, I fill that with some kind of cleaning solution like isopropyl alcohol or airbrush cleaner or something, and then I put that Ziploc bag full of parts and cleaner into the basin of the ultrasonic cleaner, and then I fill the ultrasonic cleaner up with water. It's important that if you have one of these and you use it for something like that, that you do that use the Ziploc bag with the cleaning because stuff like isopropyl alcohol is really flammable, and this thing can get pretty hot if you use it pretty often, so you don't want to have any risk of, your thing catching fire. So make sure you keep your parts in a separate bag and fill this with water. Now let me tell you, this thing obliterates paint like no tomorrow. Cleaning airbrushes is probably my least favorite part about owning them, and especially when they're really gunked up and messy. And this thing shaves off literally hours of time spent cleaning, and it is so invaluable for even just that. If that's the only reason you're getting one of these things, I still think it's worth it. But I also use this cleaner to strip the paint off of models. Now, I don't strip the paint off of models that I've painted super often. I usually only do that if I'm painting like test models or something like that. But I have been known to peruse eBay listings or Reddit listings for models. Sometimes it's cheaper to acquire models that are already caked in someone else's paint job that you don't like. And it's a simple process of taking those models, putting them in the Ziploc bag full of cleaner, and dunking them in this thing and filling it with water and turning it on. For stripping the paint off of models, this is the easiest solution. Just blitz them with the Ultrasonic Cleaner and then take an old dirty toothbrush and give them a little scrub down, and the paint should come off super easily. Far easier than if you just leave them in a jar with some ISO for 24 hours or something like that. It is so much quicker with something like this. Now, an ultrasonic cleaner is not a tool I use every day or even super often, but when I do use it, it makes the things that I use it for so much easier and nicer and quicker to do that I think it is really, really worth the investment in one of these things. Number 4 on this list is a thing that I probably use the most out of any of the other things on this list, and that is a Vortex paint mixer. Now, I think that this specific object is originally intended for use in labs or something with test tubes and vials and, magic potions or something. But I do know that different companies nowadays are making or at least marketing these things towards miniature painters like you and I. Anyway, shaking paint by hand sucks. Let's be totally honest, it sucks. It doesn't mix the paint that well, even if you use mixing bowls, and it takes forever. The first paint mixing assistant that I ever had was this shitty little nail polish shaking thing. That was another one of those 15 different Amazon listings, badly translated English things. And it worked okay. It was alright. All it ever did was shake the paint, and I never really found it super effective. I eventually splurged on a Vortex mixer. Now, the one that I got is pretty pricey, and it's easy to balk at a price tag like that. I don't blame you for shying away. But believe me when I say that this thing makes its value over 1,000,000 times over every single time I sit down to paint. No matter how long a paint has sat on my shelf between uses, with some ball bearings in there and a little bit of time on the Vortex mixer, that thing is coming out silky smooth like new. It is such a time saver and annoyance remover that I never, ever want to paint without something like this ever again. If a Vortex mixer has any downsides besides the price, which again, I understand, not wanting to spend your hard-earned dollars on something like this, it's that the vibrations of this thing can hurt your hands if you've got arthritis or carpal tunnel or are sensitive to vibrating controllers or something like that. I know some people that bothers, so just keep that in mind. And then the other thing is that the Vortex mixer is a pretty heavy piece of machinery and the vibrations are pretty intense, so if you've got a really flimsy, rickety painting desk, it can kind of shake the whole thing pretty uncomfortably. But if you don't need to worry about either of those things and you're willing to shell out the cash, a Vortex mixer is so nice. Just so nice. Mine is a lifesaver, and I love having one. Now, my 5th and final pick on this non-essential, essential hobby luxury list is a bit of a controversial one. It's a bit controversial for a few different reasons, and we'll get into that in a sec. But my fifth and final pick is an airbrush, or airbrushes, or all of the stuff that you need to begin airbrushing, because it's usually a few different things that you need to get. You need a booth and a compressor and a respirator mask, and it's a lot of purchases, and that's one of the reasons why it's a kind of controversial pick for this list, because for a lot of people, that's a lot of money and a lot of different things that you need to get in order to use an airbrush. An airbrush is a pretty big investment in a lot of different ways, not even just in money, though it is and can be pretty pricey. It's also a major space investment. You need to dedicate a lot of space in your hobby room for one of these things. You need a compressor, you need a booth to vent out the airbrush fumes, you need a place to have all your consumables like your different isopropyl alcohol or cleaners and your paints and your thinners and your gloves, Q-tips, cleaning tools, supplies, your respirator. You need to dedicate a fair amount of space to this, and for a lot of people, it can be really hard to make that room. It's also a pretty big time investment. It's a whole different skill set from just regular brush painting that you need to learn, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to learn, and it can be pretty scary to learn it as well. Beyond that, cleaning an airbrush takes time, maintaining an airbrush takes time. In general, these things are a lot more labor-intensive and time-intensive than a regular paintbrush. An airbrush can be easy to break or mess up. The needles get really, really thin and fine, and it's really easy to bend or snap something. It's easy to drop a small airbrush component when you're trying to clean it and break it. I've done that a couple of times. You have to be willing to learn how to care and clean and maintain this airbrush, and you have to be willing to accept that sometimes things might break, and sometimes you'll need to spend more money than you want on parts for this thing. You have to be willing to dedicate the space to it. You have to be willing to put on the respirator and the gloves and, buy more gloves and, buy all the consumables that you need to use an airbrush. You have to be willing to learn how to use it. But if you're willing to take the dive into airbrushing, I think it is super, super worth it. Even if you only ever use an airbrush just for the sake of priming and varnishing models, I still think, especially a cheap one, is still worth it, just for those uses. Spray cans are really annoying, really fussy, really hard to get consistent results out of, and they're also very weather dependent, and you need to have outdoor space to use them. An airbrush booth can just be set in any room that has access to a window, and you get a hose to vent out those fumes, and you can prime and varnish in any type of weather, any time of the day, well, as long as you don't have neighbors that would get mad at the noise of your compressor. But you can do it anytime you want. You'll get a perfect prime or a perfect varnish anytime, anywhere. But the techniques and skills you can learn and unlock with an airbrush are as endless as your creativity and your willingness to learn them. These techniques and skills are endless, fun, and super transformative of the way that you paint models and approach miniature painting in general. You can base coat whole armies in seconds. You can create easy glow effects, fancy dual source lighting, airbrush glazing. Truly, the possibilities are only limited by your creativity and your willingness to learn with an airbrush. And not only can you use an airbrush to paint models more efficiently or faster or better, but it's also just fun. Airbrushing is a different skill set, a different technique, and it's just fun to do. It's a fun tool to use. Putting on the respirator looks cool, and you feel pretty cool and fun sitting at your booth with your airbrush. It's a fun technique. I don't know how else to say it. I really, really understand people's hesitancy when it comes to airbrushes, and you really do not need one of these at all. But I love mine, and while they're non-essential, I really never want to partake in this hobby without an airbrush again. I think they're beyond worth the time, money, space investment, and I think that it just unlocks a whole avenue of painting that you just can't do with a regular brush, and it's just a fun tool to have. There's a plethora of amazing options online if you do your research and find the thing that works for you and for your budget. There's loads and loads of tutorials and guides for maintenance and use and clean and anything that you might need to do with an airbrush. You can find a resource online to help you with it. I love my airbrushes, and they're a luxury that I never want to be without. Alright folks, that's my top 5 non-essential, essential hobby luxuries. If you have any other hobby luxuries that you would recommend to a painter, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I'm always really interested to find out what different tools and things that people use in this hobby and how they use them. What do you think about my list? Do you have any thoughts, any critiques? Did I get the order wrong? Is there anything else that you think is not included that should be? Is there anything that is included that shouldn't be? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like the video and if you like this video, you like other videos that I've made, please go ahead and subscribe, give a like, leave a comment, all that regular YouTuber stuff. It means a lot to me that you're watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Gina the Painting Acolyte, and I'll see you next time. Take care, and bye-bye.